Hola a todos. Thank you for rejoining us on day 3 of our summit. It's been an incredible last couple of days, and we have a great session for you now. We are discussing our Latino Climate Justice Framework, an equitable climate framework for our Latinx community, a project that is near and dear to our hearts here and with our partners that we've been working on now for a few different months. And so we will be providing an overview and talking about ways for our community to get involved further in this exciting project. So to get us started and to get our juices flowing, I want to first get us over to our first poll and to get sort of the temperature check of the room. So for our first poll, please, and I don't know, are we sharing slides? Yes? Mm-hmm. Fantastic, thank you. So just to get us started, for those of us listening today, if you could please go to menti.com and enter the code 81940528. So that's menti.com, enter the code 81940528. And you will be answering the question, when you hear the term climate change, what do you think of? Let's give it a second here. To hear our responses. So when you hear of climate change, what do you think of? Because there's a lot of different, potential ways that climate change affects us. Everything from air pollution to poor health. Some people might think of melting Arctic glaciers, polar bears, extreme weather events, climate migration. So I see some answers coming in now. So we're getting extraction, destruction, imbalance, hope, disaster. Great. And this is actually a little small for me to read in my screen, so I can't read all of it. Suffering, inequality. Okay, this is a big theme that's coming up. So now if we go to the next poll, how have the effects of climate change most impacted your community? So thinking specifically now about nuestra comunidad and your specific, area. So whether it has been increased housing costs, worsening air quality and health, access to clean water, displacement. Maybe there have been extreme weather events that have been happening. I know in my home state of California, we have wildfire season all year long and extreme drought happening right now. So please just input your answers in here. We want to hear about how the climate catastrophe is affecting us and you personally. Fantastic. And Rosemary or someone, I don't know if you can actually read all of that. I can't read it. It's really small on my screen. Let me see. I want to make sure I'm capturing all of the good stuff. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I want to make sure I'm reading all these. Okay, fantastic. So I see we have, sea level rise, floods, poor air quality, drought, wildfires. So, this is all just to show that the climate catastrophe is really affecting us and our individual communities in very real and tangible ways. It's happening now. And part of what we want to do with this project is really to bring attention to a framework that can help address specifically these inequalities in our communities. And so I'm going to hand it over now to Mark to kind of go over a little bit of the vision of our framework focus on Latinx communities and the climate catastrophe. Mark.
Thank you, Irene. And thanks everyone for contributing to those polls. It's so important to hear what everyone's saying. We learn so much from what has happened over the last 3 days. Most of what I talked about a half hour ago was coming out of things that I've learned just by being with you the last 2 days. The climate crisis and environmental degradation, they're causing a rapidly escalating breakdown in civil and human rights, and they're threatening our basic life-sustaining needs: fresh air, clean water, healthy food, access to adequate health care and shelter in our communities. And any real solution to addressing this crisis will demand an unprecedented transformation of every sector of the global economy over the next decade. This urgently needed action on climate change and environmental justice can only be achieved if we address racial justice and social equity work necessary to grow an inclusive and equitable movement and successfully meet the challenges of this moment. So, in following on our strategic plan goal to develop and advocate on our own priorities so that we strengthen our federal advocacy work by researching and focusing on our community's disproportionate needs and policy priorities, we have expanded upon our successful National Latinx Climate Crisis letter we released last summer of 2021 with 90 organizations signed on, and decided that we need to create a more comprehensive, lasting Latino, Latina, Latinx framework for addressing the climate crisis at every level of government. The Green Latinos Comunidad is among the most disproportionately impacted by environmental injustice. As ancestral stewards of this planet, we must be at the forefront of this movement, prepared to lead a period of sustained collective action to bring about the significant political, economic, and cultural change necessary to overcome the climate crisis and achieve our environmental liberation. There are many excellent policy frameworks developed already to address the climate crisis. Frameworks like the Green New Deal, the Thrive Agenda, and the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, just to name a few. There's hundreds more. But none of those have really focused on the priorities, the needs, and the disproportionate impacts that the climate crisis is having on the Latinx community across this country. Some of these disproportionate impacts that have not been sufficiently addressed in prior climate crisis frameworks include access to linguistically and culturally appropriate information and services, immigration and citizenship solutions, barriers, disempowerment, access to culturally competent emergency response systems, addressing the root cause of Latin American climate devastation and climate migration, equity and resilient future for Puerto Rico and the territories, and many more, which we will go through with you soon. So, the purpose of this framework is to influence the ongoing federal climate crisis work, as well as galvanize state and local efforts to stem the tide of the climate crisis in our communities, as federal funding from the bipartisan infrastructure and hopefully the Build Back Better bill and Justice 40 goes out to states and localities. We will use this framework to increase the number of partners who are interested in addressing the causes and effects of the climate crisis on the Latino community. In closing, we're very proud to be working with 23 partner organizations on this National Latino Climate Justice Framework. Those groups, Azul, Chispa, Comité Diálogo Ambiental, Corazón Latino, Ecomadres, Farm Worker Justice, Green Latinos, HACU, ECHO, Hispanic Federation, Latino Outdoors, LULAC, MANA, Mi Familia Vota, NHCSL, NHMA, Poder Latinx, Presente.org, Sachamama, Texas, Unidos U.S. Action Fund, UPROSE, and WCVI are the original drafters with us as we move forward with this. And we're proud to present to you our initial outline of thoughts of what we believe should be covered in this climate justice framework, so that we have a document that we can share with others, that others communities at a state and local level can use to fight for what they want to see in their local climate solutions. Back to you, Irene.
Thank you, Mark. And just as I go through this outline of our initial thoughts of the policy areas and buckets affecting the Latino, Latinx community, please feel free to put in questions in the chat and we will do our best to try to get to those at the end. So this is providing sort of a little bit of an overview of the themes, of the major themes. There's 5 buckets, main buckets that with our partners we identified. Those are climate and infrastructure, public health and safety, lands, waters, and culture, process equity and access, and inclusion and economic opportunity. Next slide. So diving into our first major theme or bucket is around climate and infrastructure. And this one revolves around building resiliency and achieving equity in climate investments and policy. And so the sub-bullets really kind of are a little bit more of the meat on the bones of these frameworks. So with our partners, we looked at defining and addressing the root causes of global climate displacement and migration. So focusing on the climate refugee crisis in Latin America and the Caribbean, investing in climate resilient infrastructure and affected communities, determined and designed by community members, modernizing our electric grid and equitably advancing clean renewable energy through investments in community-based energy programs such as community solar, something I know a lot of our partners are working on, electrifying transportation, freight movement, ports, and public transit, and advancing affordable EV purchasing and comprehensive EV charging infrastructure in low-income communities, something that I think we'll have even more of an opportunity to do with more dollars through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and Secretary Buttigieg's comments. Next slide. Public health and safety. This is around protecting our comunidad from disproportionate climate vulnerabilities and toxic pollution burdens. So really strengthening farm worker, construction laborer, and other frontline worker protections from extreme heat conditions and harmful chemical exposures, developing equitable access to clean water infrastructure for underserved communities, reducing pollution from existing oil and gas wells, and remediating environmental hazards from abandoned wells and Superfund sites, and stopping new oil and gas drilling in close proximity to homes, hospitals, schools, daycare, senior centers, and other sensitive populations, while demanding that setback supply to new and existing wells and advocating for an equitable and just transition for workers transitioning away from fossil fuel jobs. That's a very meaty one and a big one, and definitely a priority campaign for us and a lot of our partners. Next slide. Lands, waters, and culture. This is around demanding respect for La Madre Tierra, nuestra cultura, and unique histories. So fostering our own culture of resourcefulness and divesting from the current dogmatic capitalist and consumeristic paradigm, investing in green spaces within vulnerable communities and prioritizing investment in ancestral knowledge to address infrastructure needs and resilience. So defined here as taking actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore ecosystems from ensuring human well-being and protecting biodiversity. Expanding ocean and waterway conservation and restoration, so protecting water-based traditions and practices and growing opportunities for comunidades that are cut off from access to local water bodies. And conserving and reframing our histories of significant places, lands, oceans, and waters to better incorporate and reflect on our cultures, values, and histories. Next slide. Bucket number 4 is around process equity and access, and really cuts across all themes. So that's around expanding access to linguistically and culturally competent and adaptable information and services. So that it can include emergency response systems while ensuring that these policies protect infrastructure and assets in vulnerable communities. Addressing the disempowerment caused by the racist and xenophobic barriers to legal immigration and citizenship status in our country. Increasing community involvement to decision-making processes, including those provided under NEPA, reference to our session yesterday on NEPA, for environmental conservation, energy, and climate mitigation and adaptation projects, and then pushing for a broadly accepted official definition of equitable access while building accountability to ensure that government program dollars, including Justice 40 designated funds, are properly and sufficiently invested in long-standing frontline entities. So that is definitely one where we've heard a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of ideas going there. Next slide. And then our last major theme and bucket from partner input is around inclusion and economic opportunity. So this is fostering social justice and building economic opportunity through addressing economic, health, and educational disparities, including expanding access to healthy foods, affordable housing, broadband, healthcare, health insurance, and all essential holistic social services needed to safeguard our communities. Demanding equity and a resilient future for Puerto Rico and the territories, incentivizing just transition educational opportunities for low-income students and workers existing from fossil fuel careers to non-fossil fuel careers. So this is really talking about what that transition looks like for our workers. Empowering and centering Latino, Latina, Latinx intergenerational voices into climate movement building opportunities by creating intergenerational advisory councils that are embedded in government agencies and programs such as outdoor education programs for low-income youth and seniors. So I know that was a lot. Please do feel free to add any questions in the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Rosie, and she's going to go through our next poll, interactive poll. So next slide.
Thank you so much, Irene. So we have one last poll for you to help you sort of align yourself and see where these different themes are active in your community. So we're going to try to drop the poll on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a poll option. And the question that we're asking is, which of these themes do you think would have the greatest impact in addressing climate injustices in your community? So Irene did a great job of going over the 5 buckets that we've outlined, or partners have outlined with us: building resiliency and achieving equity, protecting the health and safety of our comunidad, demanding respect for La Madre Tierra, equitable access of information, resources, and power, and fostering social justice and build economic opportunity. So it's not to say we have an all of the above option, because it's not to say all of these aren't relevant all the time for everybody. But we also recognize that each comunidad looks a little bit different, is in a different area, experiencing different issues. And if any of these stick out to you, that is a good thing for us to know and get feedback about. So let's see, if I could get some tech help, we'll be dropping that poll into the poll area on the right side of the chat, right next to the chat in your Hopin platforms. And we are just looking to hear a little bit about where you, as our comunidad, is experiencing the effects of these areas. I also am going to be talking a little bit, I saw a question earlier about can we download the framework? And I'm going to be talking a little bit about next steps here with you. So while we get that poll up and running, I'm going to kind of move ahead and talk about where our next steps are going to go. So if you don't mind jumping to the next slide. Great, thank you. So we have these 5 working groups, and the way that we're going to move forward is to assign people to various working groups. It's 100% possible to be part of multiple working groups at a time, or to pick an area or a couple areas that you have specialized experience in. So in these 5 working groups, we're going to have a Green Latino, 1 or 2 staff members be heading this and leading it to make sure that they're organized and that you have a point of contact person to reach out to. That Green Latinos person, staff member, is also in charge of reaching out and coordinating the build of these working groups. So right now what we have and what we've showed you is a main theme. For example, we have our climate and infrastructure bucket. And what we want to do is turn that theme into about 4 pages. And what that 4 pages is going to include is a narrative that ties all of those bullet points together. There are a lot of varying bullet points under each of these. They're broad areas. And so we want to help people understand what that means, how those details are related in a narrative. The 4-page plan is also going to include data. And data can look like a lot of different things, but we just want to show that there are facts that support these. So it could be a history of where money has been put towards these areas in past bills. It could be where money has not been put towards these areas. It could be facts about the effects on a community. If you can prove that a community is not able to access clean water, is not experiencing the education or the literacy goals that it should, those are facts that can help support these areas and that can help drive change. And then the last thing that we want to make sure we're including in each of these sections are key policy actions. So we have a hopeful view that everyone wants to do better, to build their communities, to have strong both environmental and social aspects around them. But what they might be lacking are the action items that need to get them there. So we want to include for each of these 5 areas a list of ways that people can actively support and make changes in their communities on either, a town, it could be a town, it could be state level, it could be national level, but this plan should be accessible for all of those things. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Great, and I want to put a note out there. The poll is now active on the right-hand side of your screen, so feel free to go back to that and sort of think about what areas you might be interested in working with or thinking about more with us as we move forward with the Latino Climate Justice Framework. So what that's going to look like, our next steps moving forward, is that we are going to ultimately be giving you an opportunity to sign up and become a part of this framework. And we'd like to push it in many ways, because the more input, the more eyes that we have here means that more people are going to be represented by this. And the goal is that this document should be representing everyone. So we want to give everyone here an opportunity to sign up. And in early February, coming up in a couple weeks, we'll have the leads for our working groups reaching out to the people who have signed up and highlighting what we have. So we have taken those bullet points for each theme, created a draft document that helps guide the creation of these 4 pages for each theme, and ultimately 20-page document. And we'll have them help guide the creation of that working group. In mid to late February, we're hoping to see the first draft come out, and we can start to finalize the language and actually have, built from headlines, themes, and bullet points, have a document that we could share with people. And in March, we'd like to publish a pretty version, an accessible version of this, so that you can reference it anytime there are programs or policies, things that are being built in your communities on whatever level you can direct them to this document to help make sure we're creating inclusion, access, equity as we move forward. We have not finalized the idea of where this is going to live, but you can see we could have a published draft on a website and disseminate it broadly, have open access, or we could give it an independent domain and let people go specifically to the Latino Climate Justice Framework site and access it there. So if you're looking in your chats next to me in Hopin, you're also seeing that there's a Google form that got dropped there. And that Google form is for people to sign up to be part of the working groups. If you go to the next slide, we have a reminder of what those working groups are. And I just want to put a plug in here for everyone to understand what signing up means. As I said, we would like as many eyes on this document as possible. And we understand that some people have a lot of experience in these areas. You've maybe worked in these fields for a long time, and we would love your help in writing out the working groups. That said, some people don't have as much time available, but we would still love to have you go through and look at it, edit it, maybe add a sentence, or just go through and see if you agree and or feel that something needs to be added somewhere. The more people we can have a part of this process, the better the document will be. So if you do go into that form, you'll see that there's an option to sign up for one or multiple working groups, but there's also an option just to say, I'm interested in the process. I want to be involved, even if you're not necessarily helping write and create 4 pages of document with us. So please just be aware. We would like as many people to fill out the form as possible. I'm trying to give you some time to do it now, but also if you'd like to do it later, feel free to copy that link from the chat and access it there. I also want to invite people to write any questions that you might have into the chat as well. The only one I think I saw was from earlier was, can we download the framework to look more? And right now, the best way to see the progress that we have on the framework is to sign up for our working groups or just sign up and say, I want more information. And that way we can link you to where those documents are being formed. So right now we have a Google document tree of all these working groups. And that is something that we can share access to and allow you to edit, work in, and be a part of the creation of this document. But that's where it's living now. So the best way to see it is to go into that form. All right, and we've got a corrected link in the chat, so feel free to access that as well. And I'm gonna give everyone a little bit of time to take a peek at that and ask some questions. So feel free to continue looking at it, writing in. If you do have questions and either I can't answer or we've moved on to our next event, we can still see those in the chat and we can get back to you about those answers. So please consider filling out that Google form, taking the time to learn a little bit more about this document and be a part of the Latino Climate Justice Framework. We want it to represent you and everyone. And we'd like to hear your feedback. Let's see, go ahead and go to the last slide. We just want to make sure we're thanking everyone for your participation. And then I am going to be passing it back to my coworker, Ian.